Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. My name is David Harrell, sitting in for T. Falcon Napier, and we're happy to have everybody today to move on in our Circle of Brilliance conversation.
Wonderful, David. What do we have planned for today?
Well, we don't have anything specifically planned for today, but what I was hoping to do was to get some input from all these members that we have today that look back over the last couple of months of what we've been talking about, all the way back to spiral dynamics, and just see if we have any general questions or general areas of interest that we could focus on today for our session.
Sounds good. Anybody have any thoughts or questions about what we've covered? Comments?
We did do a 1-hour presentation on MasterStream selling skills, and that was very helpful to who was on the call with us, Linda?
Brian?
Oh, Brian. That's right, yeah. Brian.
In fact, I was going to ask about something that you mentioned before, David, about MasterStream in terms of hiring people. Because I keep thinking about this idea about this period now that they're calling the Great Resignation period. And so certainly organizations are going to be forced to, I guess, really take serious this idea of finding fit and making sure they have the right candidate and making sure they can actually develop candidates. Because right now, from what I understand, there's not many organizations that actually design and build models of performance. And so that's going to be a struggle because they're still having problems with people returning to work.
I like that. I would like to pursue that. I think that would be a good topic.
Yeah, you know, every client I've talked to, and my one in New York lost several key players during the pandemic, a couple of their senior accounting professionals, and really put their accounting department in a bind. And now they're looking for a VP of underwriting. It just seems like everybody's either losing people or trying to find people, and trying to find people is a challenge because everyone's hiring.
David, did they say where the people that quit went?
Two of them retired. Two of the accounting professionals retired. You know, it seemed like the pandemic was a perfect storm for people who were ready to retire, but maybe wanted to work a few extra years. Yeah. And the pandemic seemingly shut that down and caused a great number of people to leave the market.
Okay, because I'm wondering, if so many people quit, didn't they want to like move up to a better job, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, one was let go for performance reasons and 2 retired.
Okay.
So, and this is only an organization of 47 people. So when you lose your 2 most senior accounting professionals in an insurance carrier, you've lost a lot.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But
so I looked at the MasterStream as a phenomenal process to apply to the hiring process, because you know the thing about hiring is you want to assess for fit, and that's the most important thing you're doing. But you also have to get the candidate to a place where they're very, very interested in your company, in your position, and in you. And that's a bit of a selling process. So I've taken the interview process and married it with MasterStream to kind of create a newer process for selling candidates on your job openings.
Interesting. So you're saying it's definitely a candidate's market, and the company isn't sitting back going, hey, we're offering you the best, you know, we might pick you. Now they're saying, we've got to sell ourselves.
Yeah, one of the people that's there and is involved in the hiring process, I was talking to one of his direct reports, and her description of him was that he had happy feet. That when a candidate showed up, he tried to make the candidate fit and sell the candidate on the opportunity, regardless of fit. Now, not regardless, but maybe not necessarily doing the due diligence during the interview to assess fit, and more pushing the candidate towards, the opportunity. And both of those things don't work.
Right.
Well,
Well,
when
they-
it comes to fit, isn't there like two dynamics of fit? And I know like Kathy's on a call, so she probably can chime in here, because when I'm thinking of fit, I'm thinking of organizational fit. So in other
Yep.
words, the cultural fit. But
Yep.
then on the engagement side, that's personal, right? So you see all these states of work reports that say like the Gallup reports that say, I think it's 80% of the American workforce is disengaged. That always starts on a personal level. So there's a fit on the personal side of things, like,
Yep.
and where the candidate can at least feel like they're going to be able to extract meaning, purpose, get some satisfaction out of the work they're doing. But then there's that cultural fit, that organizational fit.
Yeah.
So
When I
those are two coming together, yes?
Yeah, when I talk about fit, I talk about fit to the culture, fit to the organization, fit to the job, fit to the manager, fit to the team. Fit is very all encompassing, and you have to make sure in your process that you accommodate for those.
Mm.
Brian, you just mentioned something that really sparked in my brain. 80%, I mean, we all knew these statistics, right? 80% of the people were disengaged.
Yes.
And it just hit me. When you have a pandemic and everybody gets to finally do or think about what they want their futures to look like, or their retirement to look like, all of a sudden people change. The pandemic was the tension that took that 80%, and they all said, let's do what I've always wanted to do. Or does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Because the research shows that you can't buy people, right? So it can't be just the money. And I
Right.
think they said after 80,000, like it doesn't have the same meaning anymore. So like the theme becomes, hey, let's get this six-figure job and let's, climb the corporate ladder. But none of that stuff works over time. All you need is a little bit of inflation and all of that six-figure, or people get sick, which is happening. 1 out of 3 are going to physicians for stress-related medication, and 40% of them say it's because of the work that they're doing. And so you put all of that on top of what's going on with the pandemic, and people are just saying, look, I just don't see it being worth it to
Well, and
stay
not
in
only
something.
that, but the interesting thing is that people are having a very difficult time coming back to the office, and some people are asking for very, very flexible remote policies so that they can work more from home. So we got to, the turnover tsunami, as I called it, is really just starting. It's going to be another 3 to 4 months before we get everybody back, and we know what the Delta variant's going to do, and people, are coming back to the office and working more in the office. And during this time, I think it's very important to have stay interviews with people and make sure that you're listening to their needs and their wants and their frustrations, and creating a vision that inspires them to want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how much of this has to do with practical issues like, women in the workforce who need to deal with not only childcare, but also homeschooling,
Yeah.
that is shifting now back into the schools, but that has put such a stress on women's ability to actually function and attend and work 8 to 16 hours a day, since then there's a whole class of people in this country who work 2 and 3 jobs. And how much and it is the cost benefit, how much is it worth it for me to do this versus sacrificing or spending time with my family? So those are the questions that I ask about what kind of statistics are out there. I hear different kinds of statistics on this, but how much of it has to do with family care, child care?
Well, and now they're giving $300 a month per child to parents. So, in my case, if I would have been a parent still, I'd be getting $1,500 a month with no obligation.
Who's giving that out?
The federal government gives that out. If you're a parent right now, you're able to receive up to $300 a month per child.
Is that part of the stimulus?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
See, where does this end though? I really see such an imbalance going on.
Mhm.
Just with the demands, and people can make it because we're happy if we can put a body in the shoes of whatever needs to be done. And I'm seeing performance go down the tube because we're
Exactly.
desperate and we're compromising. Linda, the nursing home that your mom was in, that had a great reputation. That's gone downhill too. And I see it all around. People don't want to work. They don't want to work. They want to get paid. And until the stove can give you heat, you got to give it the wood and the fuel that you got to chop. I'm very concerned about where this is going to go, to tell you the truth. And it's like you said, David, we're handing it out and we're handing it out. And there's not a lot of account. I don't think people can handle challenge. I don't think they can cope, and they don't expect to. I don't know where it's going to end, but I'm very concerned.
Look, I think that's just it. Like we're behaviorally, as I look at this, right? So if you have people that you're allowing to social loaf because of the pandemic, like pandemic has become a valid excuse, but an excuse nonetheless. And so it doesn't create an environment where you're creating worth and you understand that that is a creation process, right? It just doesn't exist out there in the ether. So you're creating a dynamic for people to really take more advantage of this than actually going out and build. So I wonder, like, I don't see a lot of organizations strategically use culture and as a competitive advantage. Like that's not on the radar. They can model financial systems and everything else. I don't see this idea of culture as a competitive advantage of change and moving forward, because then you have to build in risk taking, you have to build in some of these balancing factors that you just mentioned, Edie. I don't see that happening.
Well, companies have used culture as competitive advantage for many, many years. I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening now as they're sorting out, hybrid issues, but that has been a recruiting and an on-sourcing value or an enticement for several years now. Is here's the culture we have. We're looking for a specific kind of culture fit. We invite you to come along. So that notion has been out there, but I don't know. I haven't been as plugged in recently with companies using that specifically in the last year or so and how they've been doing it. I do know some consulting firms are doing that. Ernst & Young is doing a lot with that right now.
With culture fit?
Well, not just culture fit, but using culture as an enticement
Oh, I
for
see.
here is what we offer, here is the kind of workplace we are. That was always the issue for the Googles and the Apples of the world. Obviously, Amazon has a hard time using that now, but that has always been, their enticement is we have a specific kind of culture of freedom, of creativity, of offering high pay to younger people, very bright people who can do work. And I know that that is still happening based on people I know who are getting jobs in those companies. So I don't think that's gone away by any means. I think that people are struggling with how to position it in with a hybrid kind of back to work operating model.
Okay, because I see like what you're saying, it might be in some industries as opposed to other, because I know people who with McKinsey, and McKinsey's the kind of company, if you can survive those, I think it's 7 interviews or something like that, it might even be more of the case studies and that kind of thing. You know the culture, like you know exactly the pipeline you're in to reach partnership. You're given a mentor, you have specific milestones. So there's no trying to figure out exactly what needs to be done. And that's their culture. That has been their culture. It just seems to me like it's somewhat of an anomaly for many organizations to just understand that in times of crises, that's where you dig in. Because when it comes to investing in people, the culture, for some organizations, that's a last resort. They're kind of like, we'll get to that, or we don't have the money for it. Those are the kinds of things I'm hearing. And I don't see that in healthcare a lot at all. It's just like, okay, you guys, you have whole departments walking out. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
healthcare is an anomaly
Yes.
in terms of other businesses. I mean, McKinsey's kind of an odd firm to hold up because it's been so criticized for its up or out culture, and there are a lot of people who move away from McKinsey and have moved toward other consulting firms because its culture is seen as so toxic.
Mm,
So, I would not hold up McKinsey as a positive culture model necessarily, particularly in these times when people are focused on flexibility. How can we be agile? How can we flex and find talent without putting them into boxes? And so I think that's the issue McKinsey has. So I wouldn't even go near that one, but I think that there are a lot of other large consulting firms and other service organizations who are bending over to be flexible and allow for that kind of agility. And that is part of the culture that they are building is agility, is flexibility. And
yeah.
I just don't know how it's all playing out and working, but I know that there are a lot of young people, bright people out of college who are entering some of these firms and doing incredibly and having lots and lots of opportunity. So I think we're looking at different spectrums, different spectrums of society who are, who are dealing with different kinds of issues. There is not a one size fits all issue here.
Right, right.
You know who would be interesting to analyze their culture would be, I think, Tesla.
Mm,
They must be doing something right.
Yeah, that's the kind of organization I'm talking about where, there's innovation, there's creativity, there's technology. I mean, those kinds of businesses are attracting people left and right and can be very picky about who they select, and they pay a lot of money.
hmm.
So there's that spectrum, and there are, niches in society, and there's a lot of variety. And so that's why I think it's hard to talk about this generically.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying?
You know what I've found is that, and I've done this for a long time. I have a couple of suppliers that supply me with cultural diagnostics, and the thing about most companies is they have a stated culture, they have a stated mission, they have core values, they all of that. But then when you diagnose the culture, it's nothing like they say it is.
Hmm.
Well, that's pretty typical. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why stated cultures, fall by the wayside because and why people disengage. I mean, that is, if you look at engagement statistics, and I've done that for a lot of years, people disengage largely because for two major reasons. They don't like their bosses, because who you work for matters a lot with
Hmm.
engagement, and they don't feel like the company's walking its talk.
Right.
So, that whole notion, I mean, that's why the culture business is, has both it's very popular, but it also is just so difficult because people can create and design cultures and value systems and put them up on the wall, but the whole notion of operating to those values is a whole different ballgame, and that's where people disengage. It's around,
Right.
and it's, as Brian was saying, it's less about money, although money matters, but it's more about, are people telling the truth? And
Mhm.
um and is the person that I have to deal with every day somebody that I either respect or like, or who treats me fairly, or etc. So those are like the engagement factors there.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember
Mm.
interviewing some professionals for the co-author books that I'm working on. And one of the things that we were talking about is the environment. So while they might like what they do, they may even like their company, but when the environment is toxic, then they don't feel that safe, secure, happy, and healthy. And so it starts to, impact the work that they're doing over time. And
Be
then they want
interesting
to
to
leave.
be
Mhm.
interesting to run a change grid on some tasks like, operating the culture successfully, or some things like that, to see where people are at with it. I think that would be very revealing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the main issues that's come up in the literature over the last year has been this notion of psychological safety in
Mhm.
organizations.
Mhm.
And how safe am I to be who I am, and um, and work in an authentic way. And so, I think that people are questioning a lot of that and might have been on the edge of wanting to leave their organizations. And then when COVID came along, it kind of, made it possible for some people to leave, and then made others sort of think twice about how they actually want to run their lives and operate their lives under those circumstances. That's been my kind of, thumbnail sketch of it so far. But I mean, again, without real data, I keep looking for data on this.
Yeah, I don't think that's my point. I don't think many people are really looking at it, like studying at a deep level. That's what I meant by like the strategy aspect, because take the Tesla that was mentioned, right? So I'm around the tech scene all the time, and those guys, they build things, in the lean, they build things to change quickly. So they build things for adaptability and for the agility. Most other organizations outside of that realm just doesn't seem to understand that that's kind of how you have to be able to function. You can't wait for 5 years and doing performance report reviews at the end of the year any longer. That stuff doesn't work. People need real-time reflection, real-time feedback, or else they never really know what they're working with and what needs to change. And it becomes almost like in healthcare, where it's the surprise billing, you get this
Yeah.
big bill at the end. No one wants that.
But I would argue, Brian, I mean, I'm in the org business, I mean, I see that literature, I curate that literature all the time. And that's all companies talk about, is agility, no matter what field you're in. That's all they talk about. How can I become more agile? How can I measure my agility? What kind of systems can I put into place? How can I design myself for agility? I mean, that is huge business.
They talk
And
about it, but are they doing it?
they're trying to do it.
Oh, I got you.
They're
Yeah.
trying to do it. I mean, I think healthcare, that's happening in healthcare businesses, but not in, but in like healthcare systems, like Cleveland Clinic type places, and those. But I mean, I think our healthcare system is such an anomaly. It's such a huge dysfunctional kind of thing, with so many interlocking
Yeah.
dysfunctional pieces, that it's hard to go to. But if you look at other industries, you will see people in various industries working on that agility concept continuously. But it is hard. It's not an
Yeah.
easy thing, but that is where things are. I mean, that's all anybody talks about right now.
Interesting.
Well, and so maybe that needs to be a part of the hiring process when we're talking about fit. We need to find people who have a propensity towards agility. The other thing that I always look for are people who have kind of a sense of urgency or velocity. People are often in an interview situation find themselves too comfortable and allowing the interview to unfold without a lot of input on their part. And I always worry about candidates like that don't ask questions, don't interject, don't seek clarification, have stories to tell, things like that. And I think those would be people that would be more likely to function highly in an agile environment than those who would not.
But isn't that what behavioral-based interviewing is all about? To get people to tell their stories.
It
A
is.
lot of it has to do with how the interviews are done.
Yeah.
But BBIs have been around for a long, long time, and it's tell me your story. It's all about tell me your story on competency areas that the group is seeking. So there are ways to get at that without waiting for somebody to kind of volunteer it, by chance. So
No,
I fault a lot of companies for not handling their interviewing and selection and recruiting processes effectively.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. When I teach interviewing, I teach a multi-phase process. The first interview is a screening interview where we're looking for red flags. So we're looking for skills, experience, knowledge, behavior, background, things like that, and assessing whether or not they have what's needed to function in the position effectively. The second interview is I call the selection interview. And early on in that interview, I ask people, put modesty in your hip pocket, brag a little, tell me about yourself, take me back to high school or college, depending on the age of the person, and tell me about yourself. Tell me what you did, what you learned, what you liked, what you didn't like. Just tell me, the progress that you made, the decisions that you made. Take all of that, and I'd like you to spend at least 30 to 45 minutes introducing yourself to me. Mm-hmm. And then you sit back and listen. You already have the picture of the Mona Lisa of exactly what you're looking for: skills, experience, knowledge, behavior, fit to all those different areas. And you just listen. And if they're moving too slowly, you can speed them up, or if they're going too fast, you can slow them down. But when people take 30 to 45 minutes to answer a question, it sucks out all the behavioral energy that they come to the interview with. And what you're left with is the actual person. So Kathleen, I love that. I love, that question, tell me about yourself, and then sitting back. And if you have a clear enough picture of what you're looking for, you'll see clues.
Yeah, and it's not even a necessarily tell me about yourself, which some people can talk about depending on their minds, how their mind works and their personalities, but it's more tell me about a time when you did X, Y, and Z, which correlates to a specific kind of competency area you might be looking for. Tell me about a time when you handled, unforeseen change in your life. You can go back as far as your childhood. Tell me about a time when you were faced with a very difficult situation, where you had to make value-based choices. How did you handle that? Tell me about that situation. So it's more about, I when you ask tell me about yourself, it's like people, it's hit or miss whether they're going to hit on the kinds of things you might be looking for. And this way you can get specific answers and tell very quickly whether or not someone has that skill set that you need, going forward. And it has less to do with where they went to school and more to do with how they operate on the ground.
Right. Yeah. The after I do that 45-minute question, then we transition to depth questions, which is exactly where we get to that and nail down all those different areas. that we're looking at in terms of fit. Tell me about your favorite manager. Tell me about your favorite job. Tell me about your ideal job. Tell me about a team that you worked on that you enjoyed. Have you ever worked on a team where you didn't enjoy it? And what was that like? And what happened? So all those questions, I like to let somebody wear themselves out first, because when I get to those questions, I want honest answers.
Mhm. Mhm. I like this this idea. I was reading some research from Deloitte talking about the science of fit, and their division that studies like HR and different organizational behavior. One of the things they said, the biggest challenge in management is this idea of replicating high performance. So, like what Kathy was describing becomes more of the qualitative things, because looking from the outside in, if another organization see people performing a certain way, they assume things based on quantitative. Oh, those people are putting in X amount of hours and they're doing this. And so they try to one up based on that. But what they don't see behind the scenes, or at least underneath those behaviors, are some qualitative habits and just the way that people fit into that culture that allow that to facilitate. And so those become more of where you get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, in terms of helping organizations to replicate high performance. So they can look at people who are high performers and build models that creates these level of peak performance based on these qualitative things, is what the research is showing. And that was
Right.
fascinating to me.
And those are the perfect people to analyze before you recruit, because what you're looking for are more people like them.
Right.
Maybe with a point of difference or a different background or approach or personality to blend into the team. But absolutely.
Yeah, I think it said something like, for instance, in a sales organization, like it's common for the top 10% of performers to generate 30 to 50% or more of revenue. You know, for software engineers, the top performers often write 10 times the code as average performers. So these are things that have the quantitative and qualitative, but when it comes to that cultural kind of fit, they're looking more at the qualitative things as the sustaining factor to really build out these performing and peak performance teams.
That's important, Brian, because it has to do with sustainability. It has to do
Mm-hmm.
with how long can this team endure? How long can it cohere? How, what kinds of people come together and are able to work together in a high performance team? Because individuals matter less now. Teams have mattered a lot more. And how can we come together in such a way that we are willing to and able to work effectively in groups and switch groups and move around in groups,
Mm-hmm.
for product development, service, whatever it is.
Yeah. Do you find, Kathy, have you seen a difference in terms of how not-for-profit and for-profit build out these performing team models? But it seems like not-for-profit struggles a lot more. Like I'm looking at a lot of hospitals are not-for-profit, and so some of them, depending on how much funding they receive or if they're working
Yeah.
on certain campaigns, they have a different mindset, I guess, or
Yeah, so
something.
there's a huge difference between nonprofit and for-profit. And I mean, a lot of it has to do with for-profit organizations have the opportunity to channel their resources in a more targeted kind of way and kind of focus their strategy around a smaller around they have a little more control about how they address their clients and address their stakeholders, whereas nonprofits tend to have less control over the demands, the regulations. The stakeholder world in a nonprofit is immense, and it's kind of fuzzy, and it's multifaceted, and it doesn't cohere. You might have a set of regulations that propel a certain kind of behavior, and then another set of stakeholders that run counter to that. I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about, Brian. You see it all the time.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to then clarify, unless you're a small nonprofit organization. And I've worked with, small nonprofit organizations to get really clear on what do we really want to accomplish, what is our strategy, what's our operating model, and how do we want to work together, where you can have more control and manage and ensure that there is some kind of continuous funding in place that will enable people to build a skill set over time. So some of it has to do with do we have enough funding to keep people and keep the right people and attract people so that they feel like they have some stability? That's one set of issues. And the other is, do we have any of the marginal resources needed to reward and support people and teams as they succeed? And sort of keep that rolling. I mean, those are just two small factors, but it's and the number of stakeholders of nonprofit organizations, small hospitals, small care facilities that have to answer to so many conflicting bosses, regulators, issues. I mean, it's just a lot harder, and you have to work harder with a nonprofit to get real clarity and really work with their teams, and particularly their boards of directors, to get real clarity on where they want to go and how they want to do it, and to make the hard choices around focusing on a specific kind of strategy. And I think that's the hardest thing with a nonprofit, because there's a tendency to go where the funding is, as opposed to having a clear strategy where they're able to make choices and say, no, we're going to leave that on the table. We're going to go with X. And a for-profit company can just choose to allocate its funds in that direction. Whereas a nonprofit has to make sure that they can get funds to make that happen.
Yeah, I've seen one example. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Pencils for Promise, or Pencils of Promise organization. It's
Have
an
not.
it's an organization that was started by Adam Braun, who is his brother is Justin Bieber's manager or something, but he was a Bain consultant, and he went to Argentina backpacking, around the South America and Central America and different places. And he asked the kid one time, well, what is it that you will want from me? Seeing all this poverty. And they simply said pencils. And so he started this organization, Pencils for Promise, and it was collecting literally pencils that he would send back to South America and Central America and other places around the world. But one of the things he did when he started the organization, since he had this background from Bain, was he asked himself, how do we apply for-profit business acumen to the not-profit world? And that's how he built Pencils for Promise. So he was paying people higher. They had a different mentality about their purpose and how they were going to raise money. Just as Kathy said, they weren't just depending on donors. And he became very successful with that organization. So that's only, it's a small example, but that's the kind of thinking when I'm talking about strategy. That's what I'm saying, because like Kathy said, it can't be necessarily just a one size fits all, especially when you have so many stakeholders. But if none of these things are aligning themselves and, operating in the same direction, then it certainly becomes a lot cumbersome and a lot more difficult to actually make progress.
That's one of the reasons I've done a little bit. I was supposed to leave 15 minutes ago, so I'm blowing off the other people I was waiting. But I just
I'm sorry, Kathy.
no, no. I mean, it's an interesting conversation. But I if you look at what universities are doing now, they are focusing a lot of their effort on institutes, and building institutes that have specific kind of product service focus or research for R&D focus areas so that they can make a name for themselves in certain areas and compete more effectively and get donors who will fund those institutes in a big way, and that's what I'm seeing more of, particularly in a lot of your higher tier, not just your higher tier, but, I mean, I'm on the East Coast, so I see a lot of this with, some of the, the Ivy League stuff, but the organizations that the colleges and universities that are below the Ivy League are doing some really interesting work with that, and just getting people to donate and fund over the long term some long-term initiatives that that institutes then manage, rather than allowing the college or the university to manage on a broader level.
Okay. So like a strategic partnership or strategic alliance kind of a thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But targeting and organizing and having a very specific kind of institute design where they're hiring certain kinds of people and have a very clear business plan about how they're doing it, that has to be, approved and worked through, but then given a lot of leeway about how they manage it out.
Wow. Interesting.
But with all of this, and I know we're talking about upper management, I'm just, there's 1,000 people stranded, or thousands at Charlotte, because they can't get pilots to come to work. They've canceled almost 1,000 flights it's crazy.
Yep.
And so we can talk about employee engagement and stuff. Well, they're getting paid $250,000 or more a year at American. They're getting paid very well, but they're not showing up. I had an EMS person here. She worked over 100 hours the week before she came here for a couple days break, because none of the other people showed up. So I think we can talk in our ivory tower, but in the trenches, there is a crisis. People can't be working an EMS job effectively 100 hours a week. I just think there's a real crisis that goes beyond, and they're collecting maybe the paycheck, they're just not showing up. So people who do feel responsible and sensitive and compassionate are just getting, but I don't, and it's probably because American owns 90% of the flights here that I'm more conscious of it. But people are there for days. All the flights are canceled because they're saying it's weather, but have you heard of any real bad weather? No.
Yeah.
And it's weather and staffing, and it's basically staffing.
Yeah,
So
I think
what
that's
is
right, Edie. Yeah.
Huh?
I think that's right. We can talk at a higher level about strategy and control over strategy, but the issues are more at the worker level.
Yes.
And where and how are people, and that's where you get the engagement piece of, does this organization do what it says it's going to do? And does it treat me in such a way that I can actually feel good about not only risking my life with COVID, but coming to work every day and working this hard? And, from that perspective, plus mismanagement, misalignment can keep a lot of people away. And then the burden falls on the few who either desperately need the work or are desperately committed to the work in a big way.
That's why nurses are walking out. And so it's no longer just about COVID anymore. They're walking out because they said, look, we're stretched too thin and no one's responding. So we're striking.
We have that problem here in Michigan. We have a couple of hospitals where majority of the nursing staff have walked out, not because they're not paid well, but because they don't have the staff that they feel they need to provide the services for the patients that the patients deserve.
Mm-hmm. So there's a tension management issue, yes?
Yes.
Well,
Yes,
and it's not just, I think some of these organizations are bending over backwards. I think there's a change in expectations and attitude of people. There's just a whole bunch of stuff they were showing on TikTok. I quit my job, and it's almost like the in thing, of freedom to quit your job now. I think we're looking at a real shift in mindset of a lot of workers. So no matter what the company does, It may
Mhm.
not be enough, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, pilots getting paid $250,000 or more a year and not showing up. And maybe there's other issues, but I don't hear them. And I've got a client that's an airline pilot for American. I don't think that's it. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I know there's a bigger problem though.
Yeah, I agree. Big shift, big shift. And
There is.
nobody has the answers right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to get going. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for
But
having
thank
me.
you. Sorry we kept you.
Yep. I have to go to, I have a 2:00 appointment with a client that I need to prepare a little bit for,
Yeah.
but
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And David, this has been a great discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we could continue it because I think it is, and yeah, maybe we can find the answer, huh?
These are real issues to cope
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely like to continue it because I always think about how to solve problems. I like talking about them, but I'm talking about them because I'm genuinely interested in helping to solve the problem.
Mhm.
Well, should we continue this on Thursday then? Would everybody be available for Thursday?
Sure.
I
yes.
would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I won't be here, but I look forward to the following week. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, so
Thank
we'll
you,
continue this
Kathy.
on Thursday and perhaps it'll even go into next week, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a
Okay.
wonderful week.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you on Thursday.
Okay, thank you.